What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly. And in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Wendy Weston. Wendy started Perfect Picnic with a dream, a small blanket, and an endless drive and passion. She decided to hang up her figure skates, moving on from her career as a successful competitive skating coach. She has worked her way up from the bottom, literally, from the basements of Chinatown to her Perfect Picnic storefront across from Central Park. Wendy now delivers her vision of delicious food and a luxury experience to New York City, the Hamptons, and Cape Cod. Over the past 13 years, Wendy has transformed her vision into a successful business, selling millions of dollars worth of picnics. She was recently awarded the Women in Business Award from Chase Bank. Wendy, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Wendy, this actually I'm particularly excited to talk about because I know it was such a big part of who you are today. So I want to know, where did you grow up? What type of kid were you?
Well, I grew up a competitive figure skater. As a kid, you know what? I was a rule follower as a kid, which is really funny to me now because I'm definitely not a rule follower now. I loved being good at something. So when skating came along, it was like, oh, this is great. You know, it was a creative outlet. I was good at it. So I was excited to do it. And I feel like that kind of started, I started around 6 years old, and it kind of set my childhood where I just did what I was told for many, many, many years.
And Wendy, at that age, around 6, obviously a few years after, was your dream of being a figure skater, Olympics? Like, how were you thinking of the future, if you were?
I loved being special. I loved that I had something that was definable, that was me. I remember that. I'm not sure that skating was what I was in love with. I liked having a focus and a purpose.
Yeah.
And skating was like a great way to do that, where you could kind of see, you could measure your success. You could, there were a lot of things that made sense for me and brought a lot of joy in skating. But a lot of it was the practice, more not practicing, but the practice of being an elite athlete that I loved.
I really like that you said that. Even that framing, which you don't hear a lot, but it's very true, which is just like, I liked being special. Like, I liked having that aspect of my identity and having the metrics of success and being the best. Like the competitiveness of it seems very natural to you. Yeah. And so walk me a bit through, you get into your teens, 13, 14, 15, and things seem like they started to shift. Walk me a little bit through that process.
I started to realize that, again, skating wasn't my passion. It wasn't my heart. Like I said, I loved being good at it. I remember so specifically, I was with my friend Allison, and we were in a car, and I saw these kids at the local store, like hanging out, just like eating bagel chips and a big gulp. And that vision was it just like woke me up. I hadn't really thought about it. Freedom was not something that I didn't think about it. I was very just did what I was told. And up until that point, it was okay for me. And then in that moment, it all changed. And interestingly, this weekend, a friend of mine from high school came over. He's actually considering opening a Perfect Picnic. And so we hadn't seen each other in years and years. And out of the blue, he said, "Oh yeah, remember when you quit skating?" And I was thinking, kind of, like, yes, but in my own version. He said, "Yeah, we were all shocked. It was so weird. One day you just quit." And then he said, "And then all of a sudden you were free." And I was like, oh my God, that is like, it was just so funny. He's like, and you were really fun. He's like, you weren't that fun before. And he's like, it was like you were a different person. I felt
Wow.
like I grew strong, like mentally and physically through skating and got so many gifts from it. But I was stunted in other aspects of my life that I didn't realize until you take away the label of it's so comforting when you're young to have a purpose and a focus and a vision, but then you take that away and you're like, oh my God, like I could be anything. And I'd never felt that.
I want to know, even hearing that from this friend, years blast into the past, if you will, how did you feel, even just hearing that framing of saying, like, remember when you quit? It's kind of like it's a strong statement. So how do you feel about it now? Is it very like you're very at peace with it, or is it something that's still
100% at peace with it? It was sort of validating the way he used the word. I mean, to have someone who knows nothing really about my current life and, but knew me really, really well back then, and to use the word free, which is, I think, what I said to you initially, it was validating. Over time, it changes the way you perceive your past, right? And so to have somebody validate with the language that, as we thought about doing this podcast, or the language that I had previously used was like, yeah, it was very validating. It felt great to hear that. And I was, it caused a lot of upheaval in my life and definitely some tough times, but it started the journey of like the never ending journey of finding like yourself, like who you really are without the tags or labels that you put on to be something.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
No, I love that.
And all of a sudden it was just me. I wasn't Wendy the skater or Wendy the who wants to be the Olympic champion. I was like, oh shit, I'm just Wendy. Now what?
So Wendy, I think you bring, and we've actually talked about this in a different episodes on the podcast, but I think you bring up so many good points, even like Wendy the skater, right? Like I had that same experience with soccer, and there are elements of it that, you still think about and whatnot. But you mentioned, and it seems like your friend also mentioned as well, where it seemed pretty shocking. Like it was kind of out of nowhere. It seemed like a very adamant decision that just happened.
Right.
I would love to know, you mentioned there were some challenges in that. What were some of those?
I didn't know what to do. I mean, my life was totally regimented. It was like I knew, I did the same thing every day, year after year. And then you practice and you do the same thing every day, year after year. And I just found myself like, I have no idea what to do. And so my parents were like, all right, you have to do a sport. I was like, but I don't know how to do any other sports. I was like, I didn't take gym class. So I found myself very mediocre at a lot of like new sports that I was just I was so far behind everybody else, which was also really unique. Like when you're not used to that, it's a weird feeling. Like everyone thought I would be, we want you on the field hockey team. I'm like, no, you don't. Like, I don't know anything about field hockey. And, it was interesting. So people's perception of what they thought I could do was very different than what the reality was. Just trying to figure out like how to fill the time in a productive way, because I didn't know how to not be productive. It was a weird time.
Even like academically, how were you in school? Like, did you start to shift the focus more from what's college going to be like? And, what is the future? So, yeah.
I went the other way. I was all about freedom.
Okay. Yeah.
All my friends left and went to college. And I drove my best friend, Heather, out to meet her father for the first time and kept driving. And then ended up literally just drove, and my parents were like, she's lost her mind. It wasn't going well at home because I was never rebellious like that angry teen. I was just not going to not be free, and I wasn't going to listen to anybody about that. So I would respectfully decline taking anyone's advice. So I drove it was like a weird rebellion, but
so I'm picturing just you by yourself driving across the country, right? And which is amazing. And there's a lot of, look, at the end of the day, it's incredibly scary too. You don't really know where you're going, but I'm wondering, how was that experience for you? Was it as
Amazing.
you expected? Like that independence was very freeing?
Yeah, it was a little lonely. I remember at points thinking, wait, should I be doing this with someone? But it was very freeing. Those are the moments when you really get to see and know yourself, when you're challenged like that, and on your own.
What did you most learn about yourself during that time?
Maybe that I was capable. There's like when you only know how to do one thing and you can do it really well. I think a lot of the lessons that you bring forward from discipline and commitment and all those things, like I'm a very capable, if something goes wrong, like you want to be with me, it's like I would be a great partner on Survivor, like I have a good sense of, yeah, the apocalypse. It's like, I got you. And I think being able to feel strong outside of one focus felt really good.
I love that. I love that. And I think this is why I actually think there's so much value traveling, right? Like you being in an uncomfortable position and seeing, I think you're right, right? You gain that confidence that you're capable and you're a human. You can live out there in the world and you don't have to necessarily rely on others. And I think that seems like what resonated. That's at least what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And and being uncomfortable is valuable.
Was there almost like an inflection point during that journey where your like light bulb went off, like this is what I need to do in life? Or were you not even thinking, like you were so in the present moment? How were you thinking through that?
I was very present. And I think that's an illusion in life, right? Like for me, and everyone's journey is different, which I will always say, but I don't know that there's this moment of arrival or that there is this light bulb, or it feels like, I think that's this like old wives' tale that people are told, and so they're constantly looking and waiting for a moment, and there's no moment. It's like, I'm 54, where's the moment?
I think you're right. And I think a lot of people, especially when you're, in your early 20s and you're trying to navigate life and all the question marks and you're just trying to find that answer. And you're basically saying like, look, at the end of the day, you don't really have that clear answer. So given that, how do you mentally evaluate opportunities? Like how do you navigate your life and what does that look like for you?
I think I have a really good moral compass. Like, I think that that's part of it. I have a very good intuition that I trust. All of us have intuition. It's just whether or not you trust it. And I think between feeling like I have a good moral compass and trusting my intuition, I don't know what's best for anybody else, but I do for myself. And I try to trust that. I'm always a risk taker. I just have always been like, I mean, what's the worst case scenario? Like, and I do think about that with skating. Like, I really disappointed my family. Like, there were a lot of stakes when I quit that they weren't real. Like, looking back, I was never going to be an Olympic champion. That was an illusion. When you have disappointed the people you love the most, when I take chances, I've learned to really depend on myself, and I don't have the fear of disappointment of others that I did, because I already did it. Like, in this, like the wounded part of your child person, like I already did that. Like, I didn't become an Olympic champion. I didn't, follow this straight line path. And getting over the fear of disappointing people again was definitely a thing. But once you get past that, it's like, wow, I can set myself up personally to be comfortable with my choices. And then you really taking that influence of the outside out of it, I think you can make like some good, clear decisions that suit you, that might not suit everyone, but suit you.
So I'm curious, and I can go in a couple different tangents here, but I'm curious about one particular point, which is that disappointing others, right? And the heaviness of that. And I think a lot of people can relate to this. I'm wondering for you, is there an element of that is kind of an illusion in the sense, and I'm not like, I would love to hear your particular story too, of like that real moments of disappointment and how you navigated that. Because I also think there's that element where you've heightened it tremendously, right? And like at the end of the day, you have a
Right.
community who love you and they just want what's best for you. And you've created this whole narrative in your mind that you're disappointing everyone around you. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
I think part of it's real and part of it's not real, right? Part of it, my dad, who I love dearly, grew up with absolutely nothing and was a fabulous athlete and terrible broken home, and ended up he was this rock star hockey player, ended up, because the situation was so bad at home, leaving high school and going into joining the service. He left high school early and joined the service, and had given up a lot of, and I think that experience and knowing that when he put his heart into me, I was living his dream. And so I knew it crushed him. I say this with love, but it was more about him than it was about me, the disappointment, I think. Yeah, the disappointment was more about him than me. And, I didn't make the best decisions when I graduated. I mean, I drove across country. I followed the Grateful Dead for way too long. I had a blast. And, I made some questionable decisions for sure. Um, and then it took many years of sort of, paving my own road and making different choices than the people around me, till my family, not my sister, but till parts of my family like respected that and were like, "Oh, wow, you did okay," And now I think my dad takes pride in that. Like, he gets a kick out of it almost, like it is a sense of pride for him that I kind of did it my way. That took many, many years to kind of get there. But I think that acceptance from family, especially having gone through something like that, it's important. And not everybody gets it eventually. They don't, so it's important, but it can't be so important that it takes away from your personal choices and journey.
I love that. And I love how there's like a interesting like full circle moment too in that. And Wendy, now, you have a daughter, and thinking of your own journey and what you got out of it and the learnings of your own, who you are as a person, are there elements that you can kind of take out of your journey that you would want your daughter to see, or at least to learn? Like, are there replicable things?
Yeah, I mean, I think committing to something is wildly important. Go in and see what's in there and find what's happening. Whether, if you love to write whatever you can, as much as you can, and try and explore it, which she loves to write. But, and commit to something. And so you can start to reap the benefits of your hard work and see it. And it's not always going to go your way. I think that's another thing. Like, just because you're wildly smart, she's wildly smart, she's wildly beautiful, she doesn't need to be anything. Like, I want her to choose things and go for it, but at the end of the day, it's like there's no guarantee, you know, who you're you don't need to be the president. You don't need to be, I mean, of course, I want her to aspire to her dreams, but aspire for herself, and whatever that is. I mean, like Rick Rubin, what does he say? Something about, he tells us, an artist should, create for themselves. You shouldn't create with the audience in mind. And I feel like that with life, right? Like, create your vision for yourself. You can't be thinking about, oh, what if I'm just such and such, like whatever it is, and you never become a New York Times best-selling author. Like, that's okay, and if it does, great, bonus, but do it because you can't not do it. When Perfect Picnic started, I mean, there was zero chance I could not do it. It's like I had to do it. It wasn't a choice anymore because it was my heart and my passion. It's what I wanted. And I hope that for her, it's like lean into what you love.
I love that. And there's so many nuggets in there that it actually reminded me. I recently listened to, and I actually recommend anyone to go listen to this. It was the Founders podcast with Charlie Munger. It was a reflection of his biography. And he mentioned on that bit about commitment, right? He said almost like the biggest mistake we make is multitasking. Like, specializing in something is so valuable, and to just really lean into that a lot. And then the other piece as well is, you mentioned about like mistakes and whatnot. He said, I wrote this down. He said, only those who are asleep make no mistakes.
Right,
like it's part of life.
Right.
And so anyway, I love it. So I'm so excited to get into Perfect Picnic now. Tell me a bit, what was the inspiration behind it? And yeah, how did you get it started?
It started, my best friend, I hadn't been out of the country, and her grandmother was from Sicily. So when her grandmother passed, she said, we're going, so we got our tickets. We went for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and traveled down the Amalfi Coast and then across Sicily and back to Rome. And it was just this, I mean, it was a life changing experience. And part of what I loved so much was each little village we'd go to, we'd run and get a bottle of wine, our cheese, our baguette, we'd run and go to the sunset and have a moment that wasn't rushed. It was just like being present with something delicious to share. And it was, just a quiet, lovely, it was like the highlight of our day. And when I got home, I thought, wow, we raced around like crazy in this country. And, where's that moment? So came up with the idea, and then it was put on hold. I got pregnant with my daughter. I was teaching skating still. And I was like, oh, I'm not really in the position to make some major change. Then when she was 3, I got to do this. I felt like I was doing, not only, I was doing myself a disservice for sure, but I felt like I was doing my daughter a disservice because I was afraid, of failing. And what if I blew it and I couldn't, I was a single mom and I might fail, but if I don't try, then I definitely failed. So I went for it, and I was super proud of that and super proud of, I feel like my daughter has learned so much watching me struggle and go for it and try and just keep trying and keep trying and keep trying, for every 30 no's, you get one yes. For every, it's like, and really having a commitment to the business and the vision and to what I thought I could create. And, I'm still learning and growing with it. And it's, it sort of feels, I mean, it doesn't feel 13 years old. Parts of it feels like it's just begun. And I'm not sure where it will go, which is exciting.
And Wendy, reflecting back on the 13 years, right? What has been, would you say, the most rewarding and then the most challenging aspects of founding your own company?
I think the most rewarding part, I love people. Like, I'm wildly passionate about people. Whether it's a customer or my crew or, I say my passions, Perfect Picnic was the culmination of my passions. I love people, food, and creating experiences. And I feel like there's something really, really fun about that, like being able to deliver just a nice moment for people, like that's high quality, that people can just really enjoy. I love that. I think the hardest part was you sacrifice a lot when you build something. And my daughter sacrificed a lot, as basically I just had her under my arm running. It was nonstop. She was with me. She was in the basement. She was just with me. And she learned a lot. And she saw that, me trying and sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing. And, she was part of that. But there was a certain sacrifice for her, that her life wasn't like a lot of her other friends.
Yeah.
So that was hard. It isn't part-time. You don't go home and the day ends. It's every minute of every day. Balance isn't really like a thing.
So given that, right, is what did you do to put yourself first sometimes, or at least like, prevent burnout? And yeah, I see the face you're making, which is like probably not a lot, but what did you ever have a moment where you were like, okay, shit, I got to do something? Or
I'm really, really lucky that I have a wildly good group of friends. A lot of my energy and, I get from being around other creative driven people. So I feel like I had a lot of support in that emotionally, and not having one partner it's like a different way to live. So you have a community that's amazing, that, it's that really, really helped. I mean, that refueled me. I mean, it could be a conversation with somebody who just really gets you and knows what you're going through. That conversation I could live off of for days. It's like, somebody who gets it and respects what you're doing too. And that was, and I'm very social, so we'd be half dead at the end of the day, and we sit outside on the sidewalk in front of my house, and it was always full of people. And like Ruby would be in bed, and you sit, like, I live in a ground floor apartment, so we actually sit with a table and chairs on the sidewalk in the Lower East Side, and it's that brought a lot of community and fun. That was it.
One thing that I find strikingly similar from a founder, at least like the founders I talk to, right? And then high athletes or high performing
Right.
athletes is the difficulty almost to separate the success of you as a founder, of Perfect Picnic compared to, Wendy's worth as a human, if you will. And do you find that, and how have you navigated that a bit?
Well, it's funny because my mom said to me once, I'm really worried about you, Wendy. And I said, why? I was like, why? And she said, well, because you put so much of your value and your self-worth, is so dependent on Perfect Picnic succeeding. I didn't agree with her. I felt like I had lost my identity once before in skating, and I didn't feel like that. Like, I didn't feel like I wanted to succeed. And it wasn't going to be because I didn't try my hardest. Like, I knew if it didn't happen, it definitely wasn't because I didn't do everything in my power to make it happen. Some things just don't work, and it's not necessarily about you. And, the concept was so new. Everyone was like, what is a picnic company? Like, it's, and now I tell people I have a picnic company, and they go, oh, which company are you with? I'm like, oh my God. So it's changed so much over the years, when it could have just not worked because no one cared about picnics in the same way I did, and that would have had, you have to frame it and get it out there in a way that people can understand. And, a lot of your success too, a lot of it's hard work and dedication. And then there's luck, I mean, luck plays a big part. And I had a little bit of luck. I had one piece of press early on that validated my concept to myself and to my people around me. It was like, oh, she's onto something, I guess, because everybody wrote about it, and I was like, phew. And meanwhile, I had no idea what I was doing still, but I was just glad somebody cared. That's always a good sign. If someone cares, you're like, yay.
It reminds me of in Guy Raz, his podcast, he asked his founders at the end, what percent was luck and what percent was hard work? Because I think most of them, there's always an element of luck, and it's just a matter of like grabbing that luck. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're not the only one out there trying, right? I mean, everyone, there's, and some people get luckier. It's like, I've done really well and I'm super proud of where I am. Am I done and satisfied? No, not yet. Yeah. So, I mean, there's always room to stretch and grow, but I do think it's important. And this is something I've worked on the last few years, is to actually be proud of yourself and where you are. And that's not that easy, especially if you're so used to gunning for the gold. It's like, wait,
Absolutely.
oh, I did okay. And I think that's, having those moments really, I think, can change the quality of your life and your path.
I think there's also that value of community, which you touched on. I think that's an element too, where it's almost like those reminders, right? To be proud of yourself and like take a step back and realize what you've done and how far you've come and whatnot. So I love that.
Yeah, because it's hard to see when it's you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Especially when your head's down and you're just like grunting and struggling.
Yeah.
You're like, oh wait, where am I?
So Wendy, a lot of the founders that I've had on She Leads, a lot of them have this, whether it's college background, different careers within tech and whatnot. Whereas yours, it's very experiential, like you've just learned by living in the world. And I think probably more valuable than all, the confines of a school combined. But I want to know, what aspects of founding Perfect Picnic required the greatest learning curve?
Well, I remember the first time I met with one of my mentors. He, I literally am like, I'm like a tornado of creativity and all passion. And like, I knew nothing, like actually nothing. And he was like, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. You're going to build a deck and da, da, da. And I'm thinking, I write in my, write down deck. question mark. I'm like, what the hell is a deck? I'd never heard of it. Never. Like there is nothing in my life that I would have needed a pitch deck for. Simple things like that I knew absolutely nothing about. So, going from like you basically have your PhD in figure skating where there's nothing I didn't know. I mean, of course there's things I didn't know, but not really. I mean, you at least knew 100% of the basics of everything, and I knew 90% of the other stuff,
Right.
And this was like, I just got a good idea and I feel like I can do it, and it was like a lot of those things were tricky, and finding myself in rooms with people who I literally didn't know what they were saying or talking about. And I'd write it down and go home and be like, what was that? No idea. That was fun and interesting. And I've learned a ton.
And how did you navigate that? Did you lean on others, or was it complete fake it till you make it? Like you acted like you knew exactly what, okay. Yeah.
I faked it 100%. I had no idea most of the time what was happening.
I love that.
And you just, you try to ask appropriate questions and then research and then watch a lot of Shark Tank. I was like, that's when it first started, right? It's probably 15 years old or 13. It was around the time that I started, that Shark Tank started. I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. There was just so much to learn and to think, business feels like people ask me, what do you do? And I was like, I don't know. I like to make stuff. And I mean, like, I like to make a lot of stuff, a lot of different things, but business to me is like a creative process. It's so interesting, and there's so many different things that it can be. It's not one way. So there really is a lot of like creativity in it that I think I didn't realize, and I really love. It's like that I've really enjoyed and was a surprise for me. I didn't anticipate that.
I really appreciate that you said that, even from the vein of, I think so often, and this could be like rooted when you're very little, right? But you get put in a box of saying, you're good at math, or you're the creative type. And like those two usually don't go together, or, so I think even bringing into the conversation of like founding a company, right? That could be so creative, and it could be, not the most exciting company, but still there's so many different angles to go about it and whatnot. So I love that. I love that perspective.
Yeah, no one of us will like create the identical thing, right? So whatever those choices are and decisions you make and how you unfold it and what you choose is, you have multiple options. So you're using your instinct and to kind of get where you end up. And it will always be different than someone else in some capacity because it's you.
So Wendy, I want to know, outside of Perfect Picnic, what is something that you're obsessed with that others rarely talk about or are as well?
Sex. I would say, okay,
I love it.
I would say women's sexual health. I think it is our sex, both. I mean, and that's combined in women's, I feel like now we're in such a tough, terrible time as far as, losing control of our own bodies, obviously is wildly concerning. So from one level to the, from the fact, and the function side to the physical, just, pleasure side, I think people really underestimate the importance of like sexual health, and women especially. I mean, men, it's like a joke, and women, it's like no one talks about it. And I find that wildly shocking, and I think it's super fascinating. And I just think there's so, they say like youth is wasted on the young, and they're young and having, these like the 20 somethings with all these experiences. And I'm like, what is everybody talking about? Like, there's so much left to explore in life. And especially with menopause, which also isn't talked about, all the changes. And now, thank God, people are actually paying attention to what happens to women. And just there's so much sexual joy and that can still exist at 54 years old, that is like, I feel like I haven't even got, I mean, in so many aspects of my life, I haven't feel like I've really gotten started yet. Like, I'm just beginning everything, right? And I think, so anyway, that's something I think about a lot. And I just think I meet so many people, no one's having sex. It's like, it's no one. It's so weird.
And it reminds me, and I think you would love it, is I talked not too long ago to Polly Rodriguez on She Leads, and she's a founder of Unbound.
Yeah,
And she has an
amazing.
incredible story where she had cancer and she had to go through menopause at 21 years old. But like her whole passion, that's why she started this company, which is, women's sexual health isn't talked about and there's still the stigma around and like breaking that barrier. So anyway, it reminds me so much of that. I love it.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. And I think it's really important because I say like men, I mean, they have one day they like can't get an erection. And the next thing you know, the entire medical community is like, like behind them, it's like,
Yeah.
my God, and here we are like quietly struggling. And it's, I think, you know what I mean?
That's great.
It's
I
like,
love it.
geez.
Okay, so Wendy, I want to hear it. Maybe this is similar, but what is your most contrary opinion?
All right. One of my beliefs, because it's what happened to me, is I believe, and it's a spiritual thing, I do not believe that my daughter lived inside my belly. For me personally, it's a completely ridiculous concept for me. I'm not saying that for anybody else, to be clear. I think that's one of the mistakes that our current society makes, that no one's allowed an opinion and everyone thinks they're right. And that is not me. I am like, live and let live. For me, when I conceived my daughter, she chose me. I felt it that instant, which I feel very blessed that that happened to me. I immediately called my best friend and said, I'm pregnant. She's like, no, you're not. And I'm like, no, I am. And she chose me.
Wow.
And sure enough, I was. And that experience changed the way I viewed a lot of things. I grew the vessel that she entered. I mean, clearly, I grew the vessel. But for me, she entered her body at birth. And then I watched my mom pass, and she exited her body in death. It was very clear. It 100% happened. And people think, it's an interesting topic because it also has to do a lot with women's health and, our abortion laws. And, I'm not saying we should be having full term, I'm saying, that's what happened to me. And it's I believe that someone chooses you, and it doesn't need to be you don't need to grow the vessel either. One of my best friends, she and her wife had a child, and she said, I can't tell you how helpful that was for me when their daughter Annie came, that Annie was coming for them. Like, I believe that. Like, she chose them as her parents. And I think whether it's an adoption process, like, be open to receiving in many different ways.
Right.
And I think it's really interesting to see what could come from that. And it's not always traditional, and it's just as beautiful and profound and intentional,
I mean, there's also an element here, even from finding peace with death too, right? It reminded
100%.
me, I read in a book, and I've never forgotten this. I don't even remember the book, to be honest, but I read in a book where I think it's almost like you think of life and death almost as realms. And like before birth, you're in a different realm, and then you enter life and you don't even know what realm you were in before. You don't know what death is like. It's a different realm, and same thing with death. So anyway, I mean, no, I think there's a lot of there's power in that. And at the end of the day, it's all a matter of just finding that inner peace, that inner, what works for you and what you can resonate, what you resonate. So anyway, I think that's excellent. And okay, my last question is, what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
Let's see. I guess if I were to pick one thing, it would be the practice of acceptance. We all can say, oh, I want to be more grateful. I want to be more, it's like we have these things that we cut, all the buzzwords that we know, which are amazing and they're important and they matter. But I think there's an acceptance part of life that is will bring a lot of peace and beauty, but it's a practice. It's not something that I think can happen some it happens supernaturally, never all the time, and kind of checking yourself. I say to my daughter, move through the world in a way that you're proud. You do that, you're good, right? If nothing ever, like, obviously you want to have some financial success, you want to have this, you don't want to be, but like, do that and you're winning already, right? If you can just do that simple thing, and then the rest is like, and it's not like accept passively, like, oh, it
Right.
didn't work out, I accept that. But there is an acceptance and move on to the, try harder. Do change the way you're trying, change the way you're doing whatever, but an acceptance of a moment, an acceptance of a situation that I think has a lot of power in it.
Incredible. Incredible. Move through the world in a way that makes you proud. I love that.
It's a good one. It's a way to live, that's for sure.
It's an amazing one. I think just like having those mantras, right? Like that's one that you can just stick to. So, Wendy, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on She Leads. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, I love that. That was so fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.